his hometown. They were offended by him. In chapter 14, we read of the death of his cousin, John the Baptizer. He was murdered by being beheaded. Then we have the feeding of the 5,000. That doesn't include women and children. The scripture is clear about that. So you get the idea of crowds and pressure. And then what follows is the incident known as walking on water. I suppose that's one way of getting away from the crowds and slow to understand disciples, isn't it? And then comes the incident in Gennesaret, and more crowds demanding help and healing. In chapter 15, he's challenged by the religious authorities because his disciples didn't wash their hands. And then Jesus goes on to talk about what comes out of your mouth is more likely to defile you than what goes into your mouth. And then he leaves that place and goes as far away as he could to the northernmost region. In modern maps, it borders on southern Lebanon, and it was deep into Gentile territory, probably the only time Jesus ventured into a totally non-Jewish area. In Mark's gospel, it says that he entered a house and didn't want anyone to know he was there. Why? What does all that say to you? Because to me, it says that Jesus is stressed, worn out, tired, in need of a break. He no longer knows who is friend and who is foe. But he does know that from now on the heat is on. And he is so very, very tired. Now, none of us here get exposed to celebrity press mongrels. When I preached on this in 2017, we were being bombarded by TV programs on Princess Diana because it was the 20th anniversary of her death to which she was pursued by the paparazzi in central Paris. She was hounded by photographers who all wanted a piece of her constantly. How would you react to being the 24-hour focus of the media? Have you ever been surrounded by up to 1,000 cameramen? Cameramen who were there every time you appeared in public. So crowds followed Jesus. They were all wanting just a bit of him. And Jesus is tired and fed up with crowds, all wanting something from him. He just wants a bit of peace and quiet, and he's getting neither. Maybe when I preached on this last time, I was trying to impose 21st century morality on a first century person. But you see, I expected Jesus to hold to a higher standard. I didn't expect Jesus to use insulting language. I didn't expect Jesus to turn down a plea for help. I didn't expect Jesus to show racial prejudice. I'm disappointed. Jesus is unkind, cruel, and sarcastic. He slanders this woman. This isn't a Jesus I like very much. So the chronological context is vital. But it's not the only thing to take into account. And that was the first mistake I made. So where did I go wrong? I think part of it was by concentrating on that immediate context. Number one, in the past I've argued that Jesus is challenging some of the most cherished beliefs of his culture, the purity codes, part of which is what you eat or don't eat, and how that shows where you stand with God. And Jesus was arguing with the highest proponents of this law in the Jewish hierarchy. You see, most religions have some kind of purity ethical code, revolving around what they eat or don't eat, what they wear or don't wear, what they do or don't do. Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, we all follow moral codes. Some are outward, others are more inward codes of conduct. So what Jesus was saying was this: it's not what kind of food you stick in your mouth or how clean your fingers are. What makes you dirty is what comes out of your mouth. Eating dirty is not the issue. Thinking and talking dirty is. But where I went wrong was that in emphasizing this, at the same time, Jesus was still a Jew. And he wasn't denying the purity laws. Instead, he was adding to them by saying, watch what comes out of your mouth, as well as what you put into it and how you put the food in. Secondly, another incorrect view is that Jesus was just joking with this woman. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And in his body language, he was saying to her, I'm trying to show these thick disciples exactly what I was just on about. What is regarded as clean and unclean no longer matters. You're a living illustration of this. You, an anonymous Gentile, unclean female dog, can also receive from God. This has always been seen as a good, safe, simple interpretation. It's an old view, where Jesus is always right. How could Jesus possibly be wrong? He was God's son, right? But actually, this is an appalling interpretation. One does not tease a desperate parent who wants healing for her child. From what I read in news reports, parents will go to any lengths to try and obtain healing or medicine or treatments for their sick children. They mortgage their homes, they go into debt, they make public pleas for support. To suggest that Jesus is just having her on is deeply offensive. Some of you have had children who've been in dire straits. Wouldn't you have given anything to have them healed? Would you think it was cute that Jesus was saying and using you as a kind of, I don't know what the word is, but it is really offensive. I can't believe that at one stage I thought that maybe that was a way of viewing it. Another view is that some commentators often position this woman as a victim. She is cast as a poor, ostracized, marginalized single parent. But we actually know nothing about her social, economic, or marital status. We don't even know her name, for heaven's sake. She could have been a wealthy member of the local nobility. We just don't know. The problem is an ailing child, not her socio-economic status. And then fourthly, other commentators claim that Jews typically call Gentiles dogs. This is not true. It was we Christians, including church fathers like Jerome and Chrysostom, who hurled that insult at Jews. Christians called Jews dogs, not the other way around. Jews actually welcomed Gentiles to the Jerusalem temple and to synagogues. And many anticipated that Gentiles would worship Israel's God, just as the prophet Isaiah predicted in Isaiah 56 verses 6 and 7. All nations will flow to the house of God. Seriously, folks, we have to own up to our own anti-Semitic views of Scripture and realize that Jesus was born a Jew, lived as a Jew, and died a Jew. Jesus was not a Christian. He never met a Christian. The word Christian never came into being till years or decades after the crucifixion. Acts chapter 11, verse 26. The believers, these were Jews or Gentiles who'd become proselytes. They were first called Christians at Antioch. There's a little poem that says, "How odd of God to choose the Jews, but not so odd as those who choose a Jewish God, but spurn the Jews." So let's now look at this with fresh eyes. How do Jews interpret this story? To do that, we need some understanding of the historical context. I could offer three views, but I just want to concentrate on two of them that acknowledge Jesus' hesitation, credit the woman's actions, and avoid anti-Semitism. Firstly, when Jews hear the phrase Canaanite woman, they recall other Canaanite women. Matthew in Matthew's Gospel mentions two of them in Jesus' own genealogy, Tamar and Rahab. This is in Matthew chapter 1. Judaism is a storytelling culture. It's possible that many of Jesus' hearers were illiterate, but they would have heard stories of their history since birth. How many of you have read the book Roots? It's a story of an African slave, tracing his whole genealogy. But non-writing people have incredible memories. In Roots, where African griots can recite family history from memory for 3 days or more. They just talk and give precise, accurate family history that goes on for days. It's not written down, but they've heard these stories and they are etched in their memories. Tamar is the Gospel's first woman mentioned in Matthew 1:3. It's quite a long and involved story whereby on her husband's death, she is left husbandless. That usually is not allowed. So when she realized that she is being left on her own, she tricks her father-in-law Judah into thinking she is a sex worker. She covers herself up as a prostitute did. And when she had serviced him, she takes his stuff and signet as pledges and payment for the services she offered. This story is told in Genesis 38. Now, when Judah, her father-in-law, learns that Tamar, his bereaved daughter-in-law, has played the harlot and is pregnant, he demands her execution. Great, isn't it? But she produces the pledges that denounce him as the father of her unborn child. And in Scripture, Judah acknowledges that she is the more righteous one. Tamar was a Canaanite woman. Read the story in Genesis 38. The next Canaanite woman that Matthew mentions is Rahab. She is a Canaanite sex worker, a real one. When Joshua sends spies to Jericho, they enter her brothel. I have no idea what they were doing there. Maybe they were doing a census. She protects them and demands that when Jericho falls, that they rescue her and all of her family. And so they do. And in the book of Joshua, chapter 6, verse 25, it says she has lived in the midst of Israel to this day. They're both mentioned in Jesus' genealogy. These two Canaanite women prove more righteous than the Israelite men they encounter. Their stories anticipate Matthew 15, where another Canaanite woman will succeed in her goals. Another Jewish man will respect her concern and honor her wishes. Secondly, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 39, it reads, what Jesus says, "Whoever strikes your right cheek, turn the other." Jesus is describing a backhanded slap meant more to humiliate than to damage. Otherwise put, Jesus advises that disciples reject violent responses. They absorb insults. They retain their dignity and hold their ground. The Canaanite woman could have cursed. She could have despaired. Instead, she follows Jesus' instructions. This unnamed female dog had courage in bucketfuls. She wouldn't take no for an answer. Her overriding concern was for her child. This meant she took insults on the chin and pressed on. Desperation emboldens you. This is actually a magnificent story. It's a conversion story. And it's Jesus who undergoes conversion. Who is the hero in this story? It ain't Jesus. Maybe for the first time, he fully realizes that God's grace stretches beyond the boundaries of Judaism. Scripture says that Jesus grew in grace and in wisdom. He was a human being. He needed to grow and to learn. And this is also a very Jewish story. Its structure is a form of argument called rabbinic disputation, a conflict of opinion between two scholars. But the big surprise here is that Jesus loses the argument. He loses it to a despised, foreign, stroppy woman. Was this woman instrumental in changing his thinking? Did he, Jesus, the human being, receive as much from this encounter as the woman did? Because in the end, he commends her faith and her daughter is healed. In conclusion, in the words of Amy Jill Levine, who is a Jewish scholar and a New Testament teacher, both at the same time, she says Matthew 15 verses 21 to 28 assures parents and caregivers that their efforts and exhaustion are seen. It reminds insiders that outsiders can be role models. It instructs petitioners to persevere non-violently, to hold their ground, and to have faith in their abilities and the justice of their cause. Finally, careful reading demonstrates that Christians do not need to make Judaism look bad in order to make Jesus look good. And then some words from a man called Jeff Schroeder. Jesus' ministry was challenged, changed, expanded by surprising faith. A pleading woman, a Gentile who knows God is for everyone. Are we also expanded by those who have challenged us? Well, I hope that gives you something to think about, because it certainly gave me.